Hey everyone, it's Irene Lion here. Welcome to this entire world of nervous system health, healing, trauma, and all things neuroplasticity. Today I have a Q&A for you. This is a long-form Q&A I did on my Instagram channel a little while back. It's when we were in the midst of promoting one of my courses, specifically the 21-day nervous system tune-up. Now, even if you're not ready to jump into this course, there's a lot of good information in this Q&A. We have actually time-stamped everything so you can see the breadth of questions and what I cover. It's important to also understand that this work that I do, is a blend of a few different methodologies, namely the Feldenkrais method, somatic experiencing, somatic practice, and something called somatic resilience and regulation. I know these are mouthfuls, but this is where I get my experience, my expertise, my training, and that is what infuses not only my courses and my programs, but how I answer these questions. So have a look, have a listen, and hopefully there's something in here that teaches you a little bit more about your nervous system and what it means to restore regulation at this somatic and environmental level. Enjoy. It's a post with Gary Vaynerchuk. He did a video a while ago that we shared around his plea for folks to not be, and I quote, career content consumers. So career content consumers, that means you are constantly consuming content and even my content, but you're following this feed and that feed and you're reading that book and you're buying this, da 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 da. The question is are you actually putting that stuff into action?
Friends, 2024 needs to be the year you finally do shit. Like, how many more fucking books do you want to buy? I got a new one coming, so buy that one, but like, how many more videos? How many more courses? How many more conferences? Like, there's a lot of you in this audience that consuming the information makes you think you're doing it. I just don't want some of the people in here being career content consumers. It's kind of like the way we talk shit on the internet or the way we support shit on the internet. You think typing it out on Twitter means you did something.
This idea of career content consumers, and someone said, yeah, another book, another healing modality. So some might be saying, well, Irene, you know, your work is a healing methodology. You have an online course, and you're right, I do. I also know, because I have been doing this for as long as I have, and I have been teaching this nervous system healing work for many years. I was the first person, and I'm pretty certain with this, I was the first person in this new traumatology world, in this world of the nervous system, somatic work, to have an online course online. I know that because when I did it, I had quite a few people, specifically my mentors, saying, you can't do that. You can't do therapy online. You can't teach someone without being in a room with them one-on-one. I had really high-level folk who didn't want to be involved with what I was doing and innovating because it was unfamiliar to them. I don't blame them, but we definitely know we can do work, real practical work online. And so again, this is really going to those who are really new to me here. I am more than Instagram. I am more than my shares and my pretty colors and our little video clips. I'm more than the YouTube videos that you might watch and binge. And I'm grateful for those of you who do that. And we have gotten so far away from knowing how to connect to our internal self and our organs and our viscera and our real intuition and our real biology, accurate biological information that our bodies are meant to tell us. We're so amnesic to what is inside of us that we have to relearn it. I know this because I know many people who live in the woods, who live in the outdoors. I was in that world. I was in an outdoor world, living in a ski resort, hiking in the mountains, skiing on the mountains, flying in the skies, hardcore outdoor stuff. Backpack, carrying everything on my back, camping in the woods, all the things. And I loved it, and it was wonderful. And just being in that natural world does not reteach you how to be regulated. If anything, at the extreme I was doing, I was frozen, and I know I was frozen. So we do need to relearn, and that's what I teach. There's nothing wrong with reading a book, consuming content on social media, but the question is, are you integrating it? And what I've learned through my experience is that we aren't very good, generally speaking, at integrating because of how we were taught in the school systems. If you came from a typical Prussian school system where you have to show academic prowess and pass tests and memorize and regurgitate, your brain has been trained to do that. It has maybe not been trained to take in a piece of information and make it your own. Remember the tests that you might do in university or in grade school, or more so college, but maybe in high school, where you'd have to read something and then you'd have to report and write an essay on your way of interpretation, your words, what you got from it. Some people were really good at that. Some people weren't. I personally was not good at that. So that was my brain. But we have to teach ourselves how to integrate this information, this knowledge, this science, this nervous system theory into the practical. And that is exactly what I teach. Someone asks, how do we become action-based when we are in freeze? So, great question. So being in some form of functional freeze, being in the extreme of functional freeze, which would be collapse, this is where we would find ourselves in chronic illness, autoimmune, chronic anxiety, deep depression, all these things that we classify as diseases, diagnosis, disorders, what we really are seeing. And of course there are exceptions, but there aren't many exceptions to this rule. Many of these things are a result of early trauma, adversity, high level of stress, and then it not being worked with at that core root level, which is the fight, flight, freeze. To become action-based, and by action-based, I think you mean just being able to have energy and be driven in a good sympathetic nervous system way, we have to, first of all, I can't tell you exactly what to do because I don't know your history, but the typical thing I see is this. A person has no motivation, low energy, they're sick, they're unwell, they have very little drive. The mind is plaguing them with ruminating thoughts of interjections that are just like, you suck, you're terrible, you'll never get anywhere. And even that puts us into a deeper freeze response. So if we take one of these more extreme situations, it isn't enough for me to say, I need you to go and do some jumping jacks or just get out for a walk, right? For some people who are so unwell, that is silly, dare I say, stupid advice, because they don't have the physiological capacity to actually do that, right? They don't have the cardiovascular capacity, the pulmonary capacity, the energy systems in their body don't know how to produce fuel to do something like that. And so we have to start slow. We have to start with, first of all, so this is the answer, education, learning about your nervous system, learning why it went into freeze in the first place. We have to learn what it means to build capacity. In other words, what it means to gain more space within your body so that you can feel what's actually there. For most people, their sense of feeling or their sense of what they sense, essentially, there's no any other way to say it, is like the tiniest speck, or it's really just good in one area. Some people are really just good at sensations. Some people are really good at thinking. Some people are really good at showing their emotions. Some people are really good at being type A and go. But the thing is we, as humans, we actually have this capacity to be all of those things, and we want all of those things. and we pigeonhole ourselves into, oh, I'm a feeler, or I'm a thinker, or I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert. And so the first thing is getting, again, education. Second, growing capacity in the body. And a lot of that is learning how to follow our impulses, learning how to follow our biological impulses, learning how to get reconnected also to the environment. This is where this classic concept of learning how to orient and see the world around us is important. However, and I've said this again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, if we have got deeper, earlier trauma responses in uterine trauma, past generational trauma, we were brought up in extreme chronic stress, the reason the body is in freeze is that that's its adaptive strategy. It doesn't know any other way. So to try to knock it and chisel it out of that freeze response and say, hey, I need you to look around, or I need you to squeeze, or I need you to tap, or I need you to do these tricks. I'm being a little facetious here. The system, if it hasn't been warmed up to sense more subtle things and understand what is going on in the physiology, the system might give a big F you to what you're doing, and it might say, this isn't safe. Why are you wanting me to squeeze, tap, make sounds, look outside, right? And so this is why it's so important for us to get that education on board alongside really simple foundational building practices. So there's no way to just say, for me to just say, in order to get out of freeze and into action, you have to do this. It would be like saying to a newborn baby that doesn't know how to self-regulate, you need to do this one thing, and then you need to do this next thing. It isn't that simple. Attuning, however, to the body and learning how to listen to it, that is simple. But our conditioning, our programming, our ways of having to survive in this modern, Western, domesticated world has made it such that these simple things can feel like climbing Everest, because we've spent our whole lives disconnected from simple biological impulses, right? If we think about animals in the wild, if they have to go to the bathroom, what do? Animals in the wild, they just do it. They just do it. Do they think, is anybody going to see me? Do they feel shame? Some of them might dig, right? They might dig. We see this with cats. If you have a domestic cat, they still have that instinct to dig in their kitty litter and find a hole. So when a human has to go to the bathroom, this is a longer story. It depends on how we were touched when we were infants, how we were changed by our caregivers. Imagine this. Imagine if a baby, when they are being changed, let's say it's this diaper culture, and anytime a mother or a father or a caregiver changes a child, they respond with this immense disgust of, this stinks, this is disgusting, and they stop breathing. They go, ugh, yucky, you're stinky, you're bad, right? They might not say bad, but that energy gets transferred to that little person. And then the wiping, the handling is harsh. That is like such deep programming into that human that their bodily impulses and responses, their autonomic nervous system physiology is to be shamed, is disgusting. So that's one thing. Second thing that I got a lot when I was in private practice, people had massive fear around defecation, urination, because they might have had accidents when they were young, and then when they soiled themselves, they were punished, right? if you ever catch your dog or your cat and they are going to the bathroom where they shouldn't, and you punish them, they show shame, right? They have the tail between their legs. They know they've done something bad. We hope that doesn't happen over and over again, but for so many humans that happens, and that's not good. And so then we get this connection to our bodily impulses that is not healthy, that has this deep toxic shame, this feeling of I shouldn't be doing this, but I am, and I'm gonna hide it. You know, the amount of times I've been in bathroom stalls with women and I hear women start to cough. It's not because they're coughing, it's because they want to hide the sound of gas coming out. It's amazing when we really start to see how afraid we are of our biological impulses. So someone said, how can we connect to our biological need in today's lifestyle though? So of course, you know, it's not right to, in the middle of a shopping mall, squat down and go to the bathroom, right? No. But let's say you know that you do have to. Don't wait. There's this tendency for us to hold in and keep pressure in our system. Now, I also know that it makes it sometimes impossible in public places to find somewhere to go to the bathroom. This is a problem in many cases, right? So again, how you adapt to that, you have to get creative. But it's important to, at least when you're in the comfort of your own home, find out, are you holding back some stuff because just of how society has taught you to repress? Now, to go back to this question, but how can we connect to our biological needs in today's lifestyle though? This is what I teach. You know, I'm just going to be really honest. I can't teach it to you in this live. What happens is that as you start to learn about your physiology and you start to grow capacity and you start to integrate the work, you will find yourself naturally figuring out how to shift your lifestyle. A mother commented on a post the other day, I don't know where it was, and she said, you know, I'm so desperately trying to implement the continuum concept, which is a book written by Jean Liedloff, whom has passed. She was an American scientist who went into tribes to study babies and infants and children in other cultures, and the way that the cultures that are more tribal, more connected to the land and impulse, you know, babies in these cultures, they don't have colic, they don't have trouble going to sleep, they don't have digestion problems, they don't cry excessively, they certainly don't have tantrums, and they also don't ever try to run away from the parents, right? There's a deep connection and a biological imprint that's what we want. So her book, this student was obviously reading it, and she has a newborn, and she said, I'm really trying to implement these strategies, but man, it is hard. And she's right, it is hard. You have to fight tooth and nail to protect and to find ways to be creative, to integrate this knowledge into daily life. Someone I know right now is about to give birth, and she said, it's just so difficult to try to have a home birth in this country, in this case, it's the United States. I'm not sure what state it is, because of laws and regulations. And it's just, you know, how silly is that? We've been birthing babies for so long, millennia, and we haven't needed legislation to tell us where to have our baby, right? So this is a whole other topic. So the way that we learn is we get connected to ourselves and our physiology, our birthright. There's just been so much that we've had to do to cope and compensate for the conditioning that we've been thrown into in this industrialized, domesticated world. We are domesticated animals. We're humans, but we've also been domesticated when we consider how in certain cultures we used to live on the land, by the land, be nomadic, right? The moment we started to plant and farm, This is the domestication of plants and animals. Some say it was about 10,000 years ago. That's when we really started to shift and not live by the elements, the sun, for example, the seasons. Thanks, Julie. You said, I'm so glad you didn't listen to them. This work is life-changing. Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, this is in reference to me saying that when I first brought this work online, I was told I couldn't do it. And I know it's really hard sometimes for people to believe that others can innovate and create new things, but it's possible. I have done it. I'm very proud of it. And 10,000 plus students of mine who I've never met, some of them I've met, but most of them I haven't met, they would say that they're glad I did it too, because their lives are completely different by what they've learned online. The other thing, for those of you new here, if you haven't gone and read my credentials, my bio, please do so. For some reason, I don't know why, when I mention this, there's heat sometimes with it, and that's fine. I don't know why we're so hung up on someone being proud and expressing their credentials and their, we like to call it pedigree. I've been trained well. I've been in the medical sciences since I was literally born into this world. My parents are both veterinarians of small animals. They're still alive. They're not practicing. But I was literally in an animal hospital my entire childhood, teenagehood, and my early adulthood, working in that environment with animals, sick animals, not little fuzzy kittens and puppies. I mean, sometimes. But part of my journey in integrating this work is I was around medical practice from in utero. And there's something I think there that I obviously have deep respect for, and know it has given me this ability to integrate my methodologies, which are health science, biomedical science, exercise science, the Feldenkrais method, somatic experiencing, somatic practice, and somatic resilience and regulation. Many somatic practices. So I call my work scientuitive work. I consider myself a scientuitive practitioner, and the people I'm working with to become practitioners, they will be called that. And I'm just kind of putting that stake into the ground, because what I have found, and I know this is why people have had so much success with my two online programs, namely Smart Body, Smart Mind, and the 21-Day Nervous System Tune-Up, is it's not just one methodology. It's the 21 days is 3 methodologies in one, and the SBSM is 4 methodologies in one, and that has potency, right? There's a reason why a lot of my colleagues didn't just stick with Feldenkrais or didn't just stick with somatic experiencing. They're great things, but they need to be integrated, just like medicine. Think about it. Medical doctors who operate, they are not practitioners of one method. This is a bit of a mind toss, right? If you have to have a surgery, because for me, medicine that's really solid is orthopedics and internal surgery when there's like a bullet wound or a rupture or an accident, or plastic surgery for burn victims. Those doctors are not just doing their surgery because of one teacher. They're not. They are doing their surgery because of historical references, trial and error, research that was never researched and was just experimentation, observation, application, integration. And eventually, this is what creates medicine or surgical specialties or orthopedics or pediatrics. And so think about this for a second. Right now, in this whole somatic nervous system world that's becoming way too influencer-based, it doesn't have the rigor that we saw in the development of old school medicine. I'm not going to get into pharmacy and big pharma because that's a whole other thing, right? But traditional surgical interventions that are life-saving, that stuff is not one method. So I say that because this comes back to the amalgamation of what I've put into my online courses. So question here, how do you believe that physical pain, for example, in the spine, is possible to heal with this work? How to cope with intense pain? I just did a video on pain a week ago. It's on YouTube and it's on Instagram. And in that video, I talk about pain, physical pain. I talk about what we need to do to heal that pain as a generality, but then I'm not going to go into it because I've talked about it there. Pain can be for lots of reasons. There could be something physical, right? With the spine, there could be osteophytes, stenosis, arthritis, osteoarthritis, tension in the muscles due to a scoliosis of the posture. But it could also be survival stress that isn't visible, but is still physical in the body. And so if there are old accidents where that shock trauma is still bound in even something as simple as your hip joint, that's going to impact the spine. Or if there's even like for me, I broke my ankle really badly in my 20s. And to this day, I'm 48, I am still working on that ankle and how it integrates with the rest of the body. There's a good story actually behind that and a recent ankle injury that my husband had. So I'll maybe share that if I have time. So yes, it's possible to really heal. Our students have, and if there is an actual acute situation that's pressing on something, then that has to be worked with. And a lot of times these patterns of collapse and pain are more deeply rooted in earlier stuff or earlier accidents. There's still a misunderstanding or just a not knowing. People don't realize, and this is more older generation, that if there was an accident when you were 10, that can still carry with you into your 80s. This stuff doesn't just go away with time, especially when it's coupled with survival stress, with shock, with that fight, flight, and freeze. And then in terms of coping with intense pain, the main thing is you want to learn how to experience the pain and move your attention to other parts of the body so that you lessen the intensity of that pain. And then the final thing I'll say, because I want you to go and watch the pain video. When we have pain, sometimes it can be overly coupled with emotion, or our emotions are so held in that it's actually creating pain. So I've worked with lots of people where the moment they have a good cry or the moment their anger starts to move, it shifts tension in the body. It shifts deeply held sensation in the body, and that creates pain. So again, it's not simple enough to say just have a good cry or just get angry. It has to be connected with the impulse that's stored in the body that created that repression in the first place. So just to give an example, if you grew up in an environment where you were never allowed to show any frustration, and if you did, you were hit, you were reprimanded, you were punished, you were sent to your room, you will start to learn to hold in that anger and frustration. That is a lot of tension, a lot of sensation and energy stored in the body. Fast forward to adulthood, you have a stressful thing happen to you, or you don't have to have a stressful thing happen to you. All of a sudden you just wake up one day and you feel a little off, and the next day you feel a little more off, and then a year later you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue or autoimmune or any of these syndrome-related disorders, and you're put on disability because you have so much body pain, so much stiffness. This really can be traced back to early childhood experiences being trapped. I know personally that if I hadn't have gotten into this work in the way I did in 2008, that's when I really started my trauma work, I would probably be bedridden and have all the diagnosis, and I'd probably be covered in skin rashes, because that was one of the big things I had to work with 13 years ago. I might not even be alive, to be honest. My skin was so bad, I contemplated ending it at some points. Thankfully, that did not occur. But it just shows how how much we store in our system and why it's so important for us to get into working with our bodies, and preferably before things go sideways. And if you grew up with any kind of adversity or holding stuff in or not expressing yourself or following what daddy or mommy wanted, chances are, and this is what the ACE study shows us, one will get sick. I hate to say it, but it's just what we've seen. This is why we will say, oh, what did the person die from? Oh, was it cancer? Was it heart disease? Was it dementia? Was it Alzheimer's? Very rarely do we hear someone say, they just fell asleep and didn't wake up. And the day before that, they were cooking and cleaning and driving their car and hiking and walking and connecting with their grandkids and involved in the community. Like, that's just not what we see. We just assume that we're supposed to die of an illness, and that's just not, how it really is supposed to be. Julie says to the person who asked about the pain, I had a big spine pain my whole life, never knowing that wasn't normal. That's another thing. A lot of people live with pain and they think that's just the way it is. I know one of my students, Selden Bailuni, I've done some interviews with her. She didn't realize that it wasn't normal to be in pain her whole life. If you haven't, it's the whole fish in the water thing, right? If you don't know you're in it, you don't know you're in it. But you say, I had a whole pain not knowing that this wasn't normal until I did this work and it's gone. Yes. This is the other thing, is when we start to do the right work, and the right work, in my opinion, in addition to, of course, good food and healthy exposures to sun and air and getting all the toxic crap out of our system and all that along with this nervous system work really is the root of what we need to get to. The thing that a lot of people get confused by is they think, my mindset's screwed up, I have really bad negative thoughts, I better train my mind and my behavior. But the way that we think and our behavior is supra, it's under the nervous system. So the nervous system physiology supersedes behavior and how we think. And what happens is when we start to get regulation on board of the nervous system, and the nervous system isn't just the limbic system, and it's not just the amygdala. There's some confusion that thinks I just have to work with the limbic system, I just have to work with the amygdala. None of any of my teachings once mentions amygdala or limbic system. That's saying something. And yet we have tons of amazing humans that come into our work, into the way I've put together this scientuitive practice, and they've tried to retrain their brain. They've tried to reprogram their amygdala. They've tried to shift their negative thoughts into positive, and they're still unwell. And then they get into the physiology in the way that I teach through my methodologies that come from other teachers, and things shift. And it's because in this blend, it's not just thinking and it's not just feeling and emoting, it's learning how to move again properly the way we would when we're babies. It's learning how to sense our physiology the way we would have when we were babies. It's learning how to attune to ourselves and touch ourselves in the way that we should have been touched when we were babies, but many of us were not, which is what I said at the beginning about our physiological processes that often get hindered because we're being handled by people who no doubt love us in many cases, but they have so much strain in their system that it comes through in how they touch us. It comes through and we just sit beside our kids. If there's a dysregulation in mom or dad or the caregiver, that kid feels it, right? When I sit next to my husband, it goes both ways. If I have something in me that's not out, or we feel it and it feels gross. Like, it'd be like, get away from me. Like, work on your stuff, or what do you need? Like, what are you holding back? There's something bothering you. You can tell. We just did a parenting panel on the 16th of February. It's on my YouTube channel. I recommend everyone watch that. And one story that really, there's all of them stood out, but one that stood out was Michelle Foreman. And she said She did all the things. She got the attachment parenting books, the co-sleeping thing. She did all the right things. She behaviorally changed how she mothered, but it didn't transmit to her kid because she wasn't regulated. It's like eating whole, healthy food, but you prepare it and you eat it angry. We know through research that we need to shift not just our what we do, but our internal system, our state of ease when we're doing those things. Someone asked, is this related to hunger and eating too? 100%. I just did a wonderful talk with one of our alumni from Smart Body, Smart Mind. Her name is Jerica. She speaks 100% to binge eating, changing, and actually feeling full for the first time in her life by getting into this work. Because she was overriding. She was stuck in survival responses. And so it can go two ways. Some people binge, and we do that to feel. Some people will say, I have to eat lots or else, because that makes me feel. My stomach gets so distended that I feel uncomfortable, and then I feel like I can settle. That's not good. Other side would be someone who doesn't eat, right? Who can force themselves past their hunger cues. That's not good either. But when we were brought up in the way I saw many kids brought up, and I saw this growing up, and I still see parents do it, there's threat, there's reward, there's punishment. If you don't eat that, you won't get your dessert. Come on, be a good girl, finish all your vegetables, or do this. It really toys with that natural impulse that child has that says, I'm actually full, right? We forget how small a child's stomach is. And it also happens with babies who are bottle fed. Again, this is no shame if you were. I couldn't breastfeed from my mother because of toxicities in her system. But when you are breastfeeding, you can't keep forcing a baby to drink the whole bottle. You don't say, drink the whole breast. It doesn't happen. But when you have a bottle, it's like you're waiting for that formula to all be gone. And so there can be a forcing, and the baby doesn't want it. I've watched, sadly, videos where infants are being force-fed food, and you can tell they don't like it, and yet they're still being forced. This is going to set up a very confusing state around food and nutrition and sustenance. And then we wonder why so many kids have trouble and adults have trouble when they move out and they just don't know how to eat. They don't know how to feed themselves. They don't know how to listen to their cues and then bring in the dogma of what you should eat as opposed to what your biology wants. The thing is, guys, everything I'm saying right now, I've said before over and over again. It's just, it's good to come on and it's good to remind people. I know there's a lot of people here who are new, but at the end of the day, as I mentioned, we need to get out of just consuming theory. We need to do the practice. And that's exactly what I teach in the 21-day nervous system tune-up and in Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is currently running and is closed for registration. So someone asks, is orienting the foundation of this work? I'm doing the 21-day tune-up and utilizing this every morning, and it's been transformational. Wonderful. I'm curious if this alone can bring continuous major shifts. In my experience, no. But it depends on your history and the level of, let's face it, trauma and survival stress in the body. It comes back to integration. Do you know how to integrate? Do you know how to then track your physiology and all the things that might come up and out? The reason why orienting is so powerful for so many is it's biological. There are two types of orienting. I've done like 3 videos and 1 special topic lecture on orienting. So just type in orienting and my name, if those of you don't know what this is, and watch those. But the short story is there's 2 types of orienting. One is called defensive orienting, and one is called exploratory orienting. Defensive is the loud bang and you jump and you look. we need this, right? We need to defensively, driving should always be defensive orienting. If we did that, there would be no accidents. I can guarantee it. Nobody would get hit by a car. No one would hit someone because you would be constantly scanning and orienting to your environment, right? Nobody would run red lights, all these things. So defensive orienting is essential. But when we are trapped in our survival mechanisms because of all the things that happen to us when we're young, even when we're hanging out, chilling, our defensive orienting will be high, and we don't want that. The reason why is that burns us out. So imagine if I'm doing this live with you here. I have no idea how long I've been on, but I've done lives for like 90 minutes, 2 hours. If every time I heard a bird or a door or a car, I'd do this. And you see this when you know how regulated a person is because you can see their eyes. I can't really do it, but it's like they're constantly looking like this, right? Tics, Tourette's, that is a defensive orienting response. That's typically, not always, but typically someone who has been hit many times, and it's a flinch. They're waiting to be hit, and then it comes out when they socially engage. My eyes now are a little tired from doing that, but that would be defensive orienting. We don't want it all the time. Exploratory orienting is where we just check things out. We scan. This is what we would do if we went to a beach or a forest, or I love when I'm on a plane and I love looking out the window. Even if there's nothing there, there's something about that I love. So orienting can give us a lot, but often it's not enough. It depends on the person. Some people, when they start to orient, will feel terror. Because if they've never actually connected to the world outside of themselves, because their environment was terrifying and abusive and filled with stress, the moment they start to interact with this concept, and this happens, I don't know the percentage, but it's probably quite high, especially for those that have lived with chronic fatigue-based syndromes, is there will be a spike in fear because that is not typical. They're typically like this. They're living in a very tunneled space because out there was just too intense and too scary. But we need to get it back, because if we don't get it back, that makes us susceptible to accidents, right? If we can't properly defensive orient or exploratory orient, we're also at risk because we don't see the thing coming. We don't see the curb, right? We don't see the ball coming at our head, even though we're looking right at it. And that is not just visual, it's our nervous system that is scanning either for danger, or it's scanned for danger too much in its history that it can't keep doing it anymore. Someone says, I've been doing the 21-day tune-up course for over a year and I don't see any changes so far. So thank you for your honesty. This could mean a few things. First of all, have you been asking questions in our forum of our moderators? It could also mean that your system needs to get into deeper stress organ levels. And that's what I teach in Smart Body, Smart Mind, where we get into working with early trauma, early dysregulation. The 21 days can only get us so far, and it's more the blend of somatic experiencing and Feldenkrais. It doesn't bring in the deeper elements of working with the kidney adrenals, the diaphragms, the joints. So 21 days is a starter course. And sometimes we need a little bit more to start getting into the viscera, so the organs, the layers of the body, to be able to I don't like to use the word break free, but to be able to go to those layers where the survival stress is trapped. So I don't want to make any assumptions, but I might make an assumption just generally that it's possible that there's survival stress that is very early and very deep and what we would call pre-verbal. And when our traumas are pre-verbal, they get stored in these tissues, and we do need to work with them directly. So that is often one of the reasons why. The other thing is I've found that sometimes when things don't change for people, they might be still living in an environment that isn't safe. They might be with a partner in which they cannot express their biological impulses freely. They might be in a job that makes it such that they can't rest when they need to. And sometimes our mind, our psyche can be so strong that it doesn't let us change. I'm not saying that's the case. These are just some of the things I've seen over the many years. What do you think of cranial sacral therapy? It can be wonderful. It just depends on the person. So, and this question just came up in our course. It depends on what it's for. It depends on the practitioner. It depends on the person receiving, if they can even feel it. I often tell the story, I did a lot of craniosacral in my 20s, and I'm not so sure it did anything because I was so shut down. I needed to get out of my freeze responses before I could really take in the body work. I had acupuncture when I was in my 20s, and I was like, I don't think anything's happening. And it's because, that's what happens when we can't connect to our internal systems, right? If we don't know where our stomach is, or we don't know where our liver is, or we don't know where our lungs are and how they work, or our heart, or the layers that are underneath our skin, if we're oblivious to these things, then it's very hard to feel the sensory processing and the excretions of juices and chemicals, good chemicals, hormones, right, that are coming out of our body. Now, of course, we don't want to feel everything, because if we're oversensitized to that, it can be way too hard to live. But we need to have a little bit of that nuance so that when we are having, craniosacral done, or acupuncture, or massage, or any type of body work, we can attune to our system. And often I find people just go and go and go, and they're not getting shifts because their system is still pretty locked down in functional freeze, or their system is locked in deep sympathetic fight flight. And even though they're being touched and worked with people with good intention, the system thinks it's a threat, and that the system thinks it's a danger. Even if the practitioner says, I did a video why it's not enough to just say it's a safe space. If the person receiving the treatment does not at an unconscious level believe that it's safe, then that treatment is not going to do very much. Someone said about the online work, I took SBSM twice. I do believe this is important work and understand most of it. Unfortunately, I feel like I didn't have one-on-one personal support, so I've given up. So what I'm going to say to that is, of course, it's your choice to give up. And I want to encourage you and anybody here that going through the course and its motions isn't everything. I want to make sure that you're finding ways to integrate the practices. So are you taking orienting and learning how to connect it with your daily life? Are you tuning into your kidney adrenals when you're driving and you feel some stress? Are you connecting to your diaphragms when you're in the shower and you're relaxing? These lessons are meant to be integrated. So that's number one. And while there isn't face-to-face, one-on-one support, we have got 8, including my husband and Elia, who does the movement lessons at SBSM, 8 professionally trained, somatic experiencing, Feldenkrais-based, psychotherapy-based professionals. These are my team, and they answer questions. Any question that a person has, even a question like this, I'm not getting anything. You can ask that question. So I really encourage you, to not throw out that investment, to go back in and ask the question. Ask the question. I'm not I'm not, I understand the theory, but something else is missing. And sometimes many of our students know that they need to have a coach or a therapist. Many people, they need some extra support. So also know, and we never say that this is the only thing you need. Many of our students might work with a body worker, they might work with a therapist, they might have some form of support group, they might go to NA and AA and blend this work with other methodologies. I can't stress enough how important it is for us to integrate the work. And it's part of the learning process. Just like, if a doctor, to go back to the medical industry example that I gave earlier, if a doctor only studied from the book and only passed his exams, but didn't learn how to do surgery in multiple different scenarios, different tricky scenarios, accidents, emergencies, you don't learn the craft of medicine. And I often say this work is becoming our own medicine. And so the only way that this becomes integrated, someone used the word alchemize above, it becomes alchemized when we start to integrate it with our daily life. And so I've had some students have said, this is more so with SBSM, Smart Body, Smart Mind, they have said, when I first did this, I just did it because I wanted to be the good student and say that I got through everything every week on time, like as if you were in university. But then they realized they weren't actually in it. They weren't feeling it. They were just going through the motions. And that's the difference, is this ability for us to really feel it in our system. Should we ever be taking a break from healing? Does it ever feel excessive? So I've just sort of spoken to that. That's what integration is. So this is the other thing. Like sometimes people will say, okay, now I'm healing, now I'm not. Or now I'm going to work on myself, now I'm not. And I'm just going to forget it all. That's not good either. Like when I say take a break, I might say take a break from the specific practices. Take a break from seeing the practitioner. Someone just the other day said that they started using a student, an SEP, a somatic experiencing practitioner, and it sounded like they had booked like sessions in weekly. And they said, something's telling me that I need more time before my next session. I said, well, listen to that. Your body's telling you exactly what it needs. It needs to wait, right? It doesn't need another what's the word? Another, not impact, but another addition, another activation of something new. It just needs to integrate. And because of our way of working with people, there is this, you finish your therapy session, the therapist pulls out their chart. Okay, same time next week. And it becomes this, and that could be the title of a book, same time next week. And the person doesn't even stop to ask, maybe I don't need to come next week. Maybe I'm just going to go for a walk next week when I'm supposed to be in therapy, and there's this preponderance for us to not ask, do I need to integrate? So no, there's no need to ever stop healing. I always say we're either healing or we're not. But healing can happen when we're just making a meal for ourselves. How is our mindset? Are we feeling our feet? Are we feeling our breath? I love doing dishes at night. Sounds crazy, but I enjoy the process of moving, and because I sit so much, breathing, noticing, feeling, reaching, squeezing. It's very, Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, like it's movement. So that can be healing. Laundry can be healing. Doing your errands. Are you involved with your body when you're going to the bank, going to the grocery store, picking up your kids, or are you just stressed about all the things you have to do, right? So imagine you do all this great work in my courses, or you go see a therapist, and then the moment you leave, you just go right back into survival stress. That's not useful, right? So we need to find a way to shift the mindset such that it's like, we're just always doing this work. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't just chill out on your couch and watch a show and not think about anything, right? Nothing wrong with that either. But there are ways to bring this into the work all the time that are very simple and subtle. Can you expand on sometimes the mind is strong and prevents change? Yeah, so I'm not good with psychology terms, but I've watched people who have done a lot of good somatic work. And usually this happens with people who are still connected with their family systems. I'm not saying this is always the case, but the cases I'm thinking about, they were still very much dependent on their family system. And so because of that, they constantly jumped back into that toxic soup that created their adversities in the first place. So that's one. But I don't talk about mindset. I hope to start talking more about it. I haven't, not because I don't think it's important. I wanted to lay the foundations for 10 years about the nervous system and working with the somatic systems and working with the sensory motor systems. This is everything that I teach. And I also know that because our minds are so strong, we can think ourselves even out of healing, right? So if there is we would call them introjects. So an introject would be, let's say you just had a breakthrough with something, and then something comes into the mind and it says, yeah, but you suck. So it's never gonna stick. Yeah, it's good now, but wait until next week, or the other way would be, you're never good enough, right? These are often things that come to us from our childhood and usually from our parents or the school system or something. A baby isn't born thinking I suck. It's how we're handled and touched, as I mentioned, how we're treated, how we're manipulated. That is what makes us question things. So when a kid, I've seen this a lot with narcissistic parents, produce children who are essentially afraid and having to prove themselves, there will be this way of manipulating slightly others, but also that energy of manipulation is kind of going back at you, right? People often say if you internalize anger, that's not good. Well, we can also internalize those thoughts that people spat out at us, and then we kind of keep them in this loop. So one thing that I learned that I think is quite clever from Peter Levine a long time ago was, if someone says, I'm never gonna heal, or I always screw up, or insert your thought du jour, replace it with, I have the thought. I'm having the thought that I'll never, or I have the thought that I always screw up. It's a thought. It's not a reality. But we also know through the psychosomatic world that our thoughts can create our realities. And so what I find is that when someone has a strong mind, and this is, again, I see this in people, I'm thinking of two cases where they were so smart, like math smart, book smart, way smarter than me, for example, in those intellectual pursuits. But because of that sharpness, it's like they could cross-examine any sensation to its death, right? And so that's what I mean by the psyche being so strong. That's a good way of putting it. Like, think about courtrooms, all the law shows that so many of us love, like cross-examine. It's like you're basically trying to grind that witness into like something that's not good, right? And so we can do that to ourselves in ways that diminish our healing responses. So the mind is important too, but I have experienced personally that one doesn't want to get into more advanced mind work until we have the ability to feel and sense this physiology, because if the mind work gets too intense, things can kind of push back and revolt, or we dissociate. That's typically what occurs. Do you like reflexology? I love reflexology, only when it's good. Because I've had some really bad reflexology, so bad that I've actually walked out of the treatment room. This just happened last summer. So that's the other thing is, you know, there's so many good practices out there, but it really depends on the person that's doing it. Someone said to the person who said that they've given up, don't give up. I gave up after the first and second time as well, but I've come back to it over and over again. Thank you. This comes back into just how we've been programmed and told that we aren't ever going to amount to anything. And I have a video that I did a long time ago that is titled Why We All Have the Capacity to Heal, but Not Everyone Will. And it's meant with full sincerity because some folks cannot bring themselves, for example, to disconnect from their toxic family systems. You know, they just can't bring themselves to stop calling, to stop connecting, because it's so wired into them, and it might feel like death if they disconnected those toxic strings. So for some people, that's true. I believe in a soul, so maybe that person will go on and figure it out next lifetime. And I like to say, if you're here now, why not figure it out now? Because we don't know necessarily what might occur when we cross over. So this is a more general question. I'll wrap up soon, everyone. We're going to wrap it up soon. So on a biological sense, when a woman takes on too much masculine responsibility, how does that affect her sense of safety? So those two don't necessarily go together. I'm someone who had a lot of, one could say, masculine drive, and I still do. Doesn't mean I don't have the nurture feminine drive, but even though I had a lot of that push kind of yang energy, my sense of safety was pretty solid. So it depends on the physiological wiring, usually from our childhood, infancy, and utero, and were things safe? Were we cared for good enough to have secure attachment to self and others? So it really depends on that. Having masculine energy, to me, they're very separate. And is it related to menstruation and lack thereof during a stressful period? So again, to me, I mean, I'm a woman. I got a period that comes and all that stuff, obviously, hopefully that's not too much information, but I'm still in that age bracket. I have found that I don't, it's not that I don't feel different, it doesn't overtake me. And what I've found is that, and this is a common thing, when we have really severe dysregulation and we don't have good flow in our system, women, when they menstruate, it can feel like the world is ending. And that can be for good reason, because the pain is so bad, the emotions swing so violently, and that's real. That's obviously real. And from my experience, the more regulated we've done, the more we've done work on ourselves and worked with regulation and gotten out of our survival responses, it frees up space in the entire system. And then that menstrual period is just part of life that we actually enjoy and accept. I know that might sound strange for a lot of folk, where it's still really not a pleasant time. But we would not have gotten this far as humans if it was always terrible. And what's happened, as I learn more through some of my friends and colleagues, is that a lot of what's throwing off these cycles, obviously our hormones, is the chemicals we're exposed to, the toxins, the constant, as I'm here on my phone, blue light, but I'm in a room with a lot of light and windows are cracked, so there's a balancing of the light. Check out Sarah Kleiner's work and Carrie B. Wellness. They're my gals that I talk to when I want to talk about hormones and circadian health. Kitty Martone is another one. I've done interviews with these ladies. And a lot of our, I think, troubles, if we want to call them that, it's trauma, but it's also our lack of connection to nature. And I don't just mean that from an energetic, karmic perspective. I mean that from a biological perspective. So, okay, hopefully that answers that question. Or maybe it doesn't. I'm sorry if it didn't. Someone said, my suppressed anger has started to come up and it feels overwhelming at times because I'm mad at everyone from years ago. Yep, that can happen. This is Bonnie is her name. So, again, I don't know if you're within my courses, but what I have found, and let me know if you are or not, when we get anger that comes up and we've done the foundational work to hold that energy, it feels so good. And that's something that I think isn't always understood, is if we experience an energy or an emotion coming out without the foundation, it can feel destabilizing, right? So when we haven't done the foundation, we run the risk, if I use that word, of throwing ourselves into a victim mode, or as you mentioned here, it keeps disappearing, I'm mad at everyone. So yes, there'll be a moment where there's this anger, this rage, this venom, but we don't want to stay stuck in it. And what I found is that a lot of the anger releasing practices don't get to the core of where we need to get to in the physiology. They're sometimes way too emotionally driven and not driven from the viscera and actively getting that energy out. And this is where things can loop. And then we ruminate, and then we think we're crazy because we're constantly angry at people and others. And that's not helpful either. Really good anger work, when anger work is coming out in the way we want it biologically, it usually doesn't leave any residue. It shifts, it cleanses out, and then we're good to go, right? We've gotten that out. What are your thoughts about psychotherapy? So this is similar to, people ask, what are your thoughts about reflexology? That was asked, cranial sacral therapy. It's wonderful as long as it's what your system needs and the person you're working with is good and you connect with them and they help you. The world of, seeing a psychotherapist for 40 years, 3 times a week, in my opinion, means that it's not doing what it should. We really want to be able to be free from having to see people to that degree all the time, right? So, if someone wants to, okay, but what is it actually doing? My sense is we want to work with someone and eventually move away from having that, we could say, dependence is too strong of a word, but we need to be able to also be on our own. But if our childhood wounds were so severe that we need that healthy attachment to a safe person who isn't our family, then I understand why someone might keep coming back to that psychotherapist or psychoanalyst 3 times a week for 40 years. I know that sounds extreme, but my husband's mother was a psychoanalyst and she had clients who she was seeing her entire career, right? To the point where she was even tucking them into bed sometimes. That is not literally, but like on the phone. That's, in my opinion, not helpful if someone isn't getting out of that. And this is where I found the nervous system work combined with a really good therapist or social worker or coach can be wonderful because you're also doing your own work and then getting a little help on the side. A good therapist wants you to eventually never come back, right? That's what a good therapist should be. How can we get this person so that they are able to be free and functional without me? How should we sequence healing? I've done a whole ebook on this. It's called The 5 Stages of Neuroplastic Healing Sequencing. Look it up. It's on my site. It's a YouTube video. You say I developed PTSD and later a trapped procedural memory from a shoulder injury. Yep, I understand that. That's happened to me before too. It sucks. Shoulder injuries can be terrible. But yeah, read that ebook. And then if you haven't get into my courses, the 21-day nervous system tune-up. With shoulder injuries, typically I think it's good to have, when it's time, some good manual work, but not manual work that's like get in there and, chisel away the tightness. Often subtler, more direct work. I love osteopathic work a bit more than traditional massage therapy for some of these things, because if there's procedural memory, we need to move that procedural memory out with good trauma work. Most, even osteopaths, cranial-sacral therapists, massage therapists, chiros don't have that knowledge. And so we really need to make sure that we're not overriding trapped survival responses. So check out that ebook. If you haven't gotten into my courses, do that, and then do that work in conjunction with some really good body workers. Do you find that this work allows you to better connect in groups? I feel like I often distance or push people away. And want to build better connections. 100%. I know I say that a lot sometimes, but yes. Again, this comes back to the basics of our parasympathetic nervous system that is socially engagement based. Please know that the parasympathetic also governs our shutdown response. So in order for our it's called vagal social engagement to come on board, we also have to work with the other parts that are keeping us in shutdown, as you distance, and in sympathetic flee mode. So it's not enough to just force ourselves to go to a meetup group or go dating or whatever. We want to build enough capacity so that we are actively wanting to engage. And what often occurs is we'll force ourselves to try to connect. But if our nervous system does not want that, then what is going to happen? You're going to drive yourself more into survival mode. So it drives me crazy when I see a lot of influencers saying things like, I need you to gaze into someone's eyes, or, go and look at yourself in the mirror, or do these things to push social engagement. Even a lot of the vagal toning exercises where people are getting you to make sounds. Like, again, I teach that in my courses, but if you haven't done the foundational layering to know what to do when the reactions come out from doing the sound or doing the eye gazing, you run the risk of just popping yourself back into deeper freeze or into more sympathetic activation. Oh, thanks, Bonnie. So this is relating to the anger question. I've been doing the 21-day course. Repeating the exercise is great, and it's what's helped me uncover my emotions. Thanks. You are so welcome. Someone said, my mom has been going to a therapist for so many years. Yeah. And that's okay. This is the other thing, is we can't tell someone, I've learned in all my years, I can't even tell my husband what to do. You can suggest it, but they have to come to that realization on their own, which can be so hard. But that's that whole world, and it's a bit cliche, but everyone's on their own path. And I say, I'm here teaching this stuff if you want to learn. And if you don't, that's cool too, right? But listen to the part that is urging or wanting, being pulled to learn, and watch the part that might say, yeah, that's not going to help, right? That's where that psyche, that's where I said earlier that mind can trick us. It can fucking trick us to sabotage and to not push through. Do you like tapping and emotional freedom technique? So again, it's kind of like what I said before. I have fellow colleagues who do it. I experienced it when I was working with a psychologist years ago. Did it help me personally heal my dysregulation? Absolutely not. Did it help me resource and maybe stay a little more less in pain, or a little less kind of in turmoil? Yeah, it helped a little bit. I haven't studied enough of it, but I know students whom have offered us testimony, and they're EFT practitioners, and they have also said this work needs to coincide with the nervous system work, because you can tap and you can say all those words and I'm free from this, even though this, and all the points. But if you aren't connected to your internal system, to those meridian lines, what is happening? Are you actually present to what's happening internally, or are you just going through the motions? EFT was born from something called TFT, thought field therapy. And if you look at the work of thought field therapy, I have a book back there on it, like it's complex. It's not this rote system. It is, and not that EFT is completely rote, but there's a lot of nuance to how you press and hold the different meridian lines in thought field therapy, right? So again, I think it's another one of those methodologies that is a bit more, it's convenient, it's easier, it doesn't require the level of, say, education that I give people in my courses, and it can be a good resource. But I sometimes wonder if it actually can get to those deeper layers of freeze and in uterine past generational trauma. Again, it might serve as an adjunct, but on its own, I haven't seen it be enough. Similar to EMDR, it's the same thing. I've used it, not myself, but I've had it when I've been in other sessions with therapists or somatic experiencing practitioners, and they have that as a tool, but it's never the only thing that they do. It's a tool they bring in at a very specific point in the session to help wire something up, and then it's left. Can SE, somatic experiencing, help with fears of abandonment? It really depends on the person who's working with you. But SE at its core is not developed so much for working with pre-verbal trauma. Peter can definitely work with that, but he's trained at a lot of things, and you don't get that level of training typically in a basic SE training. It depends on the practitioner. But, when you work with fears of abandonment, you got to work with the visceral somatic level. It's not just in the sensations and in completing procedural memories or shock trauma. It's like a deeper core wound, that fear of abandonment. Any thoughts on Yoga Nidra or NSDR? So this is a Huberman term. NSDR is non-sleep deep rest. So this is pretty much a big portion of what I teach. I've not done Yoga Nidra only because I don't really love practices that are a bit more scripted and rote. That's just me. And if you go in and do some of my audio lessons, you will find that they are classically would be called NSDR. They're non-sleep deep rest. We're guiding you into your system so that you can be a little less in sympathetic drive and a little less in freeze by bringing you into your body, into the breath, into the environment, into the sensations, into your impulses. So technically what I teach is in those lessons is non-sleep deep rest. We want to get into that ventral vagal, into that rest digest of the parasympathetic. Hey, someone here is, I'm an EFT practitioner and I couple it along with breathwork, sound and movement as well as prayer. And I would say if you can bring in some nervous system principles and work as well. Like I said, if you were here at the top of my talk and I was talking about medical surgery, I always go back to medicine, that kind of medicine. We're at this point in this work where it's so embryonic and we're being waterboarded with just all these things, and everybody's kind of in their own silo or echo chamber. And the only way this work is going to elevate and become mainstream in a good way, not in an influencer biohacking way, is when more people are trained the way a medical doctor is to do many, many things, and then they do the thing that the person needs because that's what the person needs. What I've seen is too many people are like, I'm trained in this, so this person is going to come to me, I'm going to do this. But there's no assessment if that person actually needs this. They might need that, and that means you have to send them away and you don't make money. Right? And so this is the interesting situation we're in, is we have so many people who are trained in really good methodologies, but they don't have more. But then the other thing that I see is people that have so many things. That's the other sign, is if someone has like a list this long of all their trainings, I like to know, how are they integrating those trainings? Do they know how to integrate those trainings together? That's the other thing I'm starting to see a bit more of. Someone asked what tea I drink. I drink all sorts of tea. All sorts. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what I drink. What do you drink? Right? There's a reason I don't share these things. It's not important. I never knew anything that my professors ate, drank, what sexual orientation they were, political orientation, whether they drove a Mercedes or a Mazda. It didn't matter. I showed up to the lectures, I learned, I did my homework, I went to lab, I did my assignments, I learned. So I'm being a little comical with that, but be very careful about what you need to know from your healers and teachers, right? We've gotten into this really strange world where we have to know everything. And I think there's a danger in that. It's like, the key is do you like the teacher? Do you want to learn from this teacher? And if so, great. Learn from them. How to learn more about working with pre-verbal trauma. This is all in Smart Body, Smart Mind. It's very complex. You have to work at the cellular level, at the stress organ level, kidneys, adrenals, brainstem, gut, connection of the gut to the vagus nerve, the layers of the body, the joints of the body, the diaphragms of the body. This is all work that is within the SE curriculum and within the other two curriculums I've studied on working with early trauma. I personally don't know of anyone else whom is blending these into an online course. Now, this doesn't mean you couldn't work with one of these practitioners one-on-one, but it is very hard to find enough of us. Like, there's not many of us trained at this level. There are people, but sometimes they're just not in your town. And so that's why I put these together in Smart Body, Smart Mind, is so that you can work with these on your own through my guidance in audio, through audio. And I guide you through sensing these organs, working with these organs, moving with these organs, and in relationship to the environment and self. Do you think there's a correlation between trauma and autism? That's a loaded question. All you have to do is look this up on YouTube, and it's not my expertise, but there's enough, I've seen enough that shows that yes, there's probably a connection, but it also depends on the severity, right? I think too many people are being diagnosed, in my opinion, with autism when it is dysregulation of the nervous system and unhealed trauma, usually early preverbal trauma. Thoughts on crystals? I like them. Can they heal us? Not alone. They can be wonderful resources. The energy in them is real, right? But yeah, for me personally, it's not enough. But they have some amazing earth energy in them. You want to make sure that you put them in the sun, though, regularly to recharge them, not the moon, the sun. Someone asked, since I'm into this work, I have more capacity for social interactions, I think you mean travel, work, but I have days where I'm in shutdown, not getting out of bed, ignoring anything. Is this sabotage or part of healing? So that can be part of the healing process. I don't know what you're doing for healing. So one thing that can happen when we don't do enough titration of this work, and that's what I teach in my courses, is we can swing too far into a bigger, we would call it energy well. So things have gone from like 0 to 100 too fast, and then the system can't digest and integrate it. So what does it do? It shuts down. It collapses, as you just said, into bed, not wanting to move. And so I just say, like, how are you doing this work? we get many comments from our students who will say that they got worse with just seeing an SEP, or just doing breath work, or seeing a psychotherapist, or doing body work, or doing more cathartic work. And usually what's happening there is there hasn't been enough titration and enough integration and foundation building. Think of it this way. You can build a house. People always talk about, you got to build a foundation. You got to have the foundation before you put the house on. That's an old analogy. But what I know from watching houses being built, because that happens where you see these things, you have to prepare the ground before you put the foundation in. And so often we're not putting that effort in. And then what happens when you pour foundation? You have to wait. You have to wait for that cement to settle, right? And you don't want it to be filled with rain, for example. And so it's so important when we get into this work that we are very methodical at making sure that we're not pushing too far. And most of us don't realize what that means. And that is a big part of the learning. Practical question, is there another way to pay for SBSM that is not credit card? Because it wouldn't work. Okay, so did you email support? So that's like one thing I would say. Yeah, we have PayPal and there's other ways. So we've had to do this with some people. So if that was one of the reasons why you didn't get into SBSM this round and you would like to, then just email us and we'll help you out. There's a little hint. We let people into SBSM even during the first week. So wink, wink. If people still want to get in, I allow that when we're still in our first week because we can. Parkinson's. So I'm not an expert in Parkinson's, but this is what I know. I've worked with 2 people who have had Parkinson's. Sadly, one passed from it. I've talked to Peter Levine through his assistant about this. And I followed someone named Gary Sharp who talks about Parkinson's incredibly. And he was diagnosed with it and he's doing really well. And talking to Peter, one trait or one thing he's found similar in a lot of people with Parkinson's is that they have got stored procedural memories as a result of surgical trauma, specifically waking up during surgery, which is terrifying. So what happens in such a case is you are exposed, you are strapped down, and then you wake up and you feel all the pain that is happening to you. And you want to run and scream, but you're paralyzed. It's horrifying, right? This is a very specific kind of work called eye of the needle work that I do not teach in my courses because it is more advanced. But this is a specialty of Peter Levine. That's where I've studied it. I've assisted at that masterclass level. This is what he has shared with me and what I have seen. The 2 people that I've worked with, it was tonsillectomies. One had a tonsillectomy without being put under. Can you imagine that? And the other, I can't remember. I think they woke up and started to choke, and that is a near-death experience. And so the body goes into a terror response, and then with that terror response, they try to fight, and they can't because they're held back down. And so there's this desire to just shake out. And I know that seems like a really crude explanation, but this is where a lot of stored survival sympathetic energy comes from, stored up traumatic stresses that couldn't get released. Restless leg is like its distant cousin, right? That restless, that fidgeting, this is where we get this ADHD. It's like this need to move, this need to shake, this need to, it can sometimes be these old stored stress responses. Hello to an alumni from SBSM. I have to say thank you. You're welcome. I work and train physicians. Ooh, this is juicy. In a pediatric hospice. Oh, that's tough. I work and train in a physicians in a pediatric hospice care outside the hospital. I wish this course could be installed into the MD fellowship trainings globally. Well, Maybe we'll get there one day. In my view, what I've seen is these institutions have to crumble a little bit more and new ones have to be built, because there's just too much, there's too much financial backing that is not holistic in nature. We'll just say it that way. So thank you. And if you ever want to have a chat, I'd love to interview you about this. So send us an email to support, because no one should be in pediatric hospice. Let's just say that. That's tough. But it happens. Can somatic work be done on kids? So yes, I want to rephrase that. We can work with kids in a somatic way. And one of the ways that kids work best with this is when the parents get this on board. Watch our parenting panel from the 16th of February. It's on my YouTube channel. Just look for parenting panel. Those parents they're like gods, in my opinion. They are working with their kids in a way that I don't think people can really comprehend until they get into this work. I know that recently there was a parenting guest on the Huberman podcast, and let's just say that I hope one day he has me on, or someone who talks about this work, because there was, in the bit that I saw, it felt very disconnected from what kids really, really need. And one of the big things is that the parent is regulated, that the parent knows how to attune to self. Because when you attune to self, you know how to attune to the kids. And so one of the things that I find kids need the most is play. So I rather kids just go out and play, or if you need to go to a therapist, go to a play therapist. But sitting a kid down and asking them to track their body and sense their body in a very therapeutic way, just like we might ask a kid to learn how to meditate, in my opinion, is not useful. It's almost like blaming them for something that is there because of the system or the lack of attunement and regulation from the parent. Again, this isn't to blame anyone, it's just the way it is. And so if you watch that parenting panel, it's all moms, they're very open about how their own dysregulation was driving problems with their parenting. And when they got their regulation on board, they knew exactly what to do with their kids, right? One of the biggest things that they said is healthy aggression. Until they were able to work with their own healthy aggression, they couldn't work with their kids. They couldn't meet their kids' needs and all of their big energies. And so when a kid knows you can handle that, they're less likely to blow up. Or if they do, which actually probably won't happen very much when you're regulated because you're attuning to them, but if they do, it doesn't freak you out and you don't try to change it. Right? And so often when these things happen in kids, we try to change them. We try to fix their behavior, right? But their behavior is a symptom of a much deeper issue, and it's usually they were not attuned to properly. Okay. Whew. I'm going to end it. Marathon. So first of all, thank you for all being here. If you've watched live or you're watching the recording afterwards, I know there was a lot of questions, a lot of good stuff. So if you came in late, I recommend, let's fingers crossed, this holds and you can rewatch. Our 21-day nervous system tune-up is on sale right now. It's $100 off, regular price of $297. And this is the work I do. The work I do is not here on Instagram. The work I do is in the hallways of these online courses. The curriculums are solid, they're strong. Are they everything? No. Some of you, like we said today, might need to see a therapist. You might need to see a body worker. You might need to hire a coach to teach you how to eat better, exercise, all these things. But this core foundational piece is the nervous system. It's what our bodies need help with when we're born. Therefore, if we didn't get it growing up, we need to relearn it as adults. So, signing off on this Tuesday. As I mentioned, a Thursday is the final day for the sale, and check all the stuff out on my site. Linked up on the bio. All of it is there. Bye, everyone.